I stood before the bridal mirror, the metallic taste of blood sharp on my tongue. The man I was supposed to marry glared down at me, his fragile ego fracturing over the heavy, beaded gown of a dead woman. They say weddings begin new chapters. For me, this was the explosive finale of a meticulously staged deception. I was going to burn his entire world to ashes before the appetizers were served. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us now. Let's begin the story. My name is Stella Crawford. I am 28 years old, and for the past 5 years, I have built a demanding career as a lead software systems architect at Ethra Innovations. My entire professional life revolves around analyzing complex digital ecosystems, identifying structural vulnerabilities, and neutralizing threats before they can trigger a system failure. I design logical frameworks that cannot be broken by human error. Yet, despite all my training, I somehow failed to detect the fatal bug systematically destroying my own relationship with Garrett Vance. Garrett possessed the kind of magnetic, effortless charisma that could instantly disarm a room full of hostile skeptics. It was that exact intoxicating charm that had pulled me into his orbit 6 years ago. But beneath his polished, confident exterior lay an obsession that cast a long, chilling shadow over every aspect of our lives. It was the ghost of his late sister, Victoria. Before her tragic passing, Victoria had been a titan in the tech industry, a brilliant and ruthless entrepreneur whose name commanded immense respect. Garrett worshipped her memory with a devotion that bordered on religious fanaticism. But his worship was not merely fueled by grief. He relied on her ghost for his very survival. Victoria's billionaire widower, Marcus, was the sole angel investor keeping Garrett's struggling technology startup afloat. Marcus held the keys to Garrett's future, and Marcus was a man trapped in his own mourning. Today was supposed to be our wedding day. The venue chosen for the ceremony was the historic, sprawling grounds of Crestwood Estate, a fortress of perfectly manicured hedges, towering marble columns, and cold, echoing halls. The entire affair cost a staggering sum of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars, all generously covered by Marcus. But in the ruthless world of venture capital and elite family politics, there is no such thing as a free gift. Marcus paying for the wedding came with an unspoken, ironclad condition. This extravagant event was not meant to be a celebration of Garrett and Stella building a life together. It was a lavish, perfectly orchestrated memorial service designed to honor Victoria's legacy. Every single detail, from the imported white orchids to the specific classical pieces played by the string quartet, was chosen simply because it was what Victoria would have wanted. The ultimate symbol of my complete erasure hung ominously on a velvet mannequin in the darkest corner of my isolated bridal suite. It was Victoria's wedding gown from a decade ago. The dress looked less like a garment and more like a glittering cage. The bodice was rigid with yellowing corsetry, heavily encrusted with thousands of vintage pearls and thick glass beads that weighed down the stiff lace like lead armor. For months, Garrett had aggressively insisted I wear it. When I had reluctantly tried it on weeks prior, the sheer weight of it had restricted my lungs and left angry, red indentations across my ribcage. "Stella, you do not understand the stakes," he had hissed at me just 2 nights ago, his fingers digging into my arm. "Marcus is hesitating on the next round of funding. Seeing you in her dress, walking down that aisle, will break his heart in the best way possible. It will emotionally secure the capital we need. It is just a dress. Stella, stop being selfish and do this for our future." His controlling nature had always crept in under the clever disguise of professional ambition. Looking back, the warning signs were constantly flashing red. He would dictate my schedule, harshly critique my appearance, and systematically isolate me from my friends at Ethra Innovations. He always blamed his volatile behavior on the crushing stress of his startup's upcoming launch. I had spent years convincing myself that his toxic manipulation was just temporary anxiety, a phase that would end once he succeeded. But I had finally drawn my line in the sand. Hidden deep inside my leather garment bag was the dress I had purchased with my own hard-earned savings. It was a sleek, minimalist silk gown, modern, clean, lightweight, and entirely me. I had secretly switched the dresses this morning, determined to reclaim at least one single fraction of my own identity on the day I was supposed to pledge my entire life to another person. Sitting alone in the cavernous, chillingly quiet bridal suite, with exactly 1 hour left before the ceremony, the grand illusion finally shattered. The heavy, cloying scent of the white lilies filled the room, making it difficult to draw a full breath. I stared at my reflection in the massive antique mirror, watching a woman who was slowly disappearing. I was not a bride. I was a prop. I was a living, breathing mannequin positioned strategically in a theatrical performance designed exclusively to charm a billionaire investor. My wedding was nothing more than a corporate pitch, and the man I loved was completely willing to sacrifice my humanity to close his deal. The tension in the silent room was palpable, a heavy, invisible weight pressing down on my chest like a ticking time bomb, silently counting down to an inevitable detonation. The antique clock on the ornate mantelpiece ticked relentlessly, its mechanical rhythm sounding like a gavel striking a judge's block. It was exactly 20 minutes before the wedding procession was scheduled to begin. The isolated luxury of the Crestwood bridal suite had transformed into a gilded cage. The heavy, oppressive silence was abruptly shattered when the massive oak door did not simply open, but was violently shoved inward, crashing loudly against the floral wallpaper. Garrett stood in the doorway. He was breathing heavily, his face flushed with a terrifying, manic energy that I had never seen before. The meticulous grooming of his dark hair was slightly ruined by his frantic movements. In his hands, he clutched the yellowing, pearl-encrusted fabric of Victoria's gown like it was a sacred artifact. "Take that off," he demanded, his voice a low, vibrating growl that barely contained his erupting fury. "Take that silk trash off right now." I stood up slowly from the velvet vanity stool, smoothing the clean, elegant lines of my own dress. My hands were trembling slightly, but I forced my posture to remain rigidly straight. "No, Garrett, I am wearing this. I bought this with my own money, and it is what I am getting married in." He hurled the heavy beaded gown onto the nearby chaise lounge. The thousands of glass beads clattered loudly against the wooden frame. "Are you completely insane?" he shouted, stepping aggressively into my personal space. "Marcus is sitting in the front row right now. The biggest venture capitalists from the valley are seated behind him. Do you understand what is at stake today? You are going to put this dress on, and you are going to smile, or you will ruin absolutely everything I have worked for." "I am not your sister," I said, my voice steady, though my heart pounded fiercely against my ribs. "I will not walk down the aisle as a living tribute to a dead woman. I am your bride. If my presence, exactly as I am, is not enough for you to marry me, then we should not be doing this at all." Garrett closed the remaining distance between us in 2 long strides. The polished, charismatic gentleman I had loved for 6 years was completely gone, replaced by a dark, unrecognizable predator. "You arrogant, ungrateful wretch," he spat, his eyes wide with rage. Then, the world violently tilted. The strike was so fast, so utterly unexpected, that my brain failed to process the physical movement of his arm. The sharp, explosive crack of his palm colliding with my left cheek echoed sharply off the high, vaulted ceiling. The sheer, brutal force of the impact snapped my head to the side, throwing my balance completely off. My vision flashed white as I tumbled backward, crashing heavily onto the cold, unforgiving hardwood floor. Pain blossomed across my face in a hot, stinging wave. A harsh, high-pitched ringing filled my ears, drowning out the ambient sounds of the estate outside. I gasped for air, pressing my trembling fingers to my mouth. When I pulled them away, I saw a bright smear of crimson against my pale skin. My lower lip was split open. The sharp, metallic taste of blood instantly flooded my tongue. For 6 years, I had believed I truly knew the man standing above me. I had convinced myself that his controlling tendencies, his late-night outbursts, and his relentless demands were merely the byproduct of a brilliant mind buckling under extreme corporate pressure. As I sat crumpled on the floor, looking up at the towering, shadow-cast figure of my fiancé, the grand illusion I had fiercely protected shattered into a million irreparable pieces. He did not strike me because he lost control in a moment of panic. He struck me because he fundamentally believed he owned me. Garrett did not apologize. He did not kneel down to help me up. He simply adjusted the lapels of his tailored tuxedo jacket, his chest heaving, his eyes entirely devoid of empathy or remorse. He looked down at me the way one might look at a malfunctioning piece of hardware. "You have exactly 10 minutes to fix your ruined face and put on Victoria's dress," he said, his tone dropping to a chilling, businesslike register that sent ice through my veins. "If you refuse, I will make a single phone call. You know exactly who my financial backers are. I play golf with the board members at Aethra Innovations. I will tell them you stole highly sensitive proprietary data. I will use every favor I have to ensure you are blacklisted from every single tech firm in Silicon Valley before the reception dinner even begins. You will have no career, no reputation, and absolutely nothing left. Wear the dress. Stella." He turned on his heel and walked out, pulling the heavy oak door shut behind him. A second later, the heavy brass lock clicked into place from the outside. I remained seated on the floor. Society dictates that a bride in this horrific situation should weep. She should dissolve into a puddle of terrified hysterics, mourn the brutal death of her fairy tale romance, and pound on the locked door begging for forgiveness. But my eyes remained completely dry. The tears simply refused to form. Instead, an overwhelming wave of absolute freezing numbness washed over my entire body. The terror and emotional confusion rapidly evaporated, leaving behind a cold, crystalline vacuum in my mind. The loving, accommodating woman who had spent years desperately trying to fix a broken man died on that hardwood floor. In her place, the cold, calculating systems architect woke up. Garrett had made a critical, fatal miscalculation. He had treated me like a fragile, dependent accessory, completely forgetting what I did for a living. My entire existence was dedicated to mapping complex networks, finding hidden vulnerabilities in heavily fortified structures, and dismantling them with surgical precision from the inside out. In his arrogant attempt to assert absolute dominance, he had just handed me the master key to his own destruction. I tasted the blood pooling in my mouth again. I swallowed it. A terrifying, razor-sharp clarity sharpened my vision. I was not going to run away crying. I was going to execute a flawless, catastrophic system failure, and I was going to ensure Garrett Vance never, ever recovered from the blast radius. The click of the heavy brass lock echoing in the quiet suite marked the start of my countdown. 10 minutes, 600 seconds, until my entire life was supposed to be irreversibly handed over to a monster. I pushed myself up off the hardwood floor, the dull throb in my cheek sharpening my focus. I did not go to the vanity mirror to inspect the damage. I did not move toward the heavy, beaded gown sprawled across the chaise lounge. Instead, I walked straight to the heavy oak door and slid the secondary deadbolt firmly into place. Just to be absolutely certain of my privacy, I grabbed the heavy mahogany chair from the vanity desk and wedged it hard under the doorknob. I moved to my personal overnight duffel bag resting in the corner of the room. Hidden beneath layers of silk robes and cosmetics bags was my primary weapon, a sleek, matte black field laptop. I pulled it out, flipped the screen open, and watched the familiar glow of the terminal boot up. My hands, which had been trembling violently just moments before, were now entirely still. The surge of adrenaline had burned away the panic, leaving behind a cold, hyper-focused state of flow that I usually only experienced when tearing down hostile malware. First, I needed a secure environment. I rapidly typed out the command lines to tunnel into the private server racks at Aethra Innovations. I authenticated my administrative credentials, effectively masking my physical location and encrypting my data stream behind military-grade firewalls. If Garrett was foolish enough to attempt a retaliatory cyberstrike later, he would find himself trying to breach one of the most heavily fortified corporate defense networks in the world. I was untouchable. With my digital perimeter secure, I pivoted my attention to the local infrastructure. The Crestwood estate prided itself on providing ultimate luxury, which included an immensely complex, state-of-the-art audiovisual and security network. What the estate management did not advertise, and what Garrett certainly did not remember, was that 8 months ago, they had hired an independent security consultant to patch a massive vulnerability in their surveillance grid. That consultant had been me, picking up a highly lucrative freelance contract over a holiday weekend. I knew every single backdoor, every routing protocol, and every blind spot in their system because I had designed the architecture of their security patches myself. My fingers flew across the keyboard, a rhythmic clatter in the silent room. I bypassed the estate's primary firewall in less than 90 seconds. I dove straight into the hidden surveillance directory. High-end venues like this always kept concealed cameras in the private dressing rooms for liability and theft protection, a fact they conveniently omitted from the bridal brochures. I located the feed for my suite. I scrubbed back the timeline by exactly 4 minutes. There it was, high definition, perfectly lit, and crystal clear. The footage captured Garrett violently shoving the door open, his manic pacing, his terrifying demands, and the horrifying, explosive moment his hand cracked across my face. It even captured the clear, unhinged audio of his threats to destroy my career. I clipped the 2-minute video file, stabilized the audio tracks, and exported the payload. Next, I mapped the network path to the grand ballroom downstairs. In the center of that opulent hall stood a massive, custom-built, 4,000-pixel resolution light-emitting diode display screen. Currently, it was cued to play a highly produced, utterly fabricated documentary about our magical romance. I accessed the venue's master presentation queue, permanently deleted the romantic video, and replaced it with my newly extracted surveillance clip. I set the playback trigger to a remote command ping from my cellular phone and locked the entire local console behind a randomly generated cryptographic key. No one in that building would be able to pause, mute, or turn off that screen once I hit play. I glanced at the digital clock in the corner of my monitor. 5 minutes left. The public execution was ready. But destroying Garrett's social and family standing was merely collateral damage. I needed to strike at the absolute core of his existence. I opened a new terminal window and initiated a direct secure shell connection to his technology startup's private development servers. Garrett had spent the last 2 years pitching venture capitalists on a revolutionary predictive data algorithm. He sold them on his visionary genius. The reality was a closely guarded, pathetic secret. Garrett was a charismatic salesman, but he could not code his way out of a basic logic loop. Over countless sleepless nights, under the guise of helping him troubleshoot, I had entirely rewritten his broken architecture. I was the ghost in his machine. I had single-handedly built the entire core algorithm from scratch. He had promised to formally add me as a co-founder after the wedding. A lie, obviously, but I had never been foolish enough to leave my intellectual property unprotected. Deep within the foundational source code, buried under layers of obfuscated text, I had embedded a dormant legal script. I ran the execution command. The script woke up. Within seconds, it systematically wiped Garrett's administrative access to the primary code repository. Simultaneously, it triggered an automated transfer protocol. Every single line of proprietary code, every architectural schematic, and the full intellectual property rights of the algorithm were legally and digitally transferred into a blind trust firmly registered under my maiden name. I watched the progress bar sprint across the screen. 50%, 75%, 100%. The repository on his end was now completely empty, replaced by a single, undeniable error message detailing the legal copyright violation of attempting to access my property. His startup, his entire leverage over the billionaire investor, his entire fabricated empire, was now nothing more than an empty, worthless digital shell. He had nothing. The internal clock hit 0. 10 minutes had passed. I closed the laptop, returning it to the bottom of my duffel bag. I stood up and walked over to the towering vanity mirror. The left side of my face was swollen, an angry red handprint blooming across my cheekbone. A thin, dark line of dried blood crusted the corner of my mouth. I did not reach for the foundation to conceal the bruise. I reached for a damp towel and carefully wiped away the excess smear of blood, leaving only the undeniable, raw evidence of his violence. I smoothed my hands down the sides of my pristine, minimalist silk gown. It fit me perfectly. It was lightweight, allowing me to breathe, to move, to fight. I stepped into my stiletto heels, the sharp click echoing against the floorboards. I walked to the door, removed the heavy mahogany chair, and unlocked the deadbolt. I did not feel like a broken bride. As I pushed the heavy oak doors open and stepped out into the dimly lit, carpeted hallway, I felt the cold, terrifying thrill of an apex predator stepping into the hunting grounds. The trap was set. All that was left was to strike the match and watch his illusion burn to the ground. The hallway outside the bridal suite was dim, illuminated only by the soft, amber glow of wall sconces. I stepped onto the thick, plush runner rug, my posture perfectly straight. The left side of my face pulsed with a hot, rhythmic ache. The skin stretched tight over the swelling bruise. I could feel the faint, sticky residue of my own blood drying at the corner of my mouth. I made no effort to hide it. Let them look. Let them see exactly what foundational pillars this grand empire was built upon. As I rounded the corner toward the grand marble staircase, the frantic energy of the wedding production hit me like a physical wall. A cluster of bridesmaids, draped in identical pale pink chiffon, froze mid-conversation. Their manicured hands flew to their mouths in synchronized horror as their eyes locked onto my battered face. The head wedding planner, a high-strung woman gripping a silver clipboard, lunged forward. "Stella, you cannot go out there yet. You are not in the right dress. And your face, oh my goodness, we need a makeup artist right now," she shrieked, frantically waving her arms to block my path. "The procession does not start for another 5 minutes. Stop walking." I did not break my stride. I moved past her with the terrifying, unstoppable momentum of a glacier. I did not offer a single word of explanation or apology. The frantic voices faded into a dull, meaningless buzz behind me as I began my descent down the sweeping, curved staircase. The main ballroom of the Crestwood estate was a cavernous cathedral of wealth and influence. 300 of the most powerful individuals in the technology sector and venture capital world were seated on rows of velvet chairs. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne, imported white florals, and the low, murmuring hum of high-stakes networking. At the very front, occupying the seat of absolute honor, sat Marcus. He looked impatient, glancing at his gold watch, waiting for the memorial parade to begin. A grand string orchestra, situated on a raised platform near the altar, was playing a sweeping, mournful classical overture, perfectly curated to manipulate the emotions of the billionaire in the front row. As I reached the ground floor, the massive mahogany doors to the ballroom stood wide open. The traditional path dictated that I should wait for the wedding march, link arms with a designated escort, and slowly walk down the center aisle of white flower petals to meet my waiting groom. I ignored the aisle completely. Instead, I veered sharply to the right, stepping off the floral runner and walking briskly along the outer perimeter of the seated guests. My minimalist silk gown moved fluidly around my legs, completely devoid of the heavy, suffocating beads that were supposed to shackle me. A ripple of confusion began to spread through the crowd. Heads turned, whispers ignited like dry brush catching fire. I bypassed the altar and walked straight up the short flight of steps to the raised stage where the wedding officiant was reviewing his script. The elderly man looked up in profound confusion as I approached him. Before he could utter a single syllable of protest, I reached out and firmly snatched the wireless microphone from his trembling hands. I tapped the head of the microphone twice. The sharp, percussive thud echoed through the towering speakers. violently slicing through the classical music. The conductor of the orchestra jumped, his baton faltering. The cellists and violinists abruptly stopped playing, resulting in a discordant, screeching halt of music that sent a physical shudder through the room. Then, absolute, terrifying silence fell over the 300 guests. Every single pair of eyes in that massive, opulent hall snapped toward the stage. The murmurs died instantly. The silence was so profoundly deep that I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning vents overhead. I looked out over the sea of horrified faces. I saw venture capitalists lowering their champagne flutes. I saw Marcus gripping the armrests of his chair, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. And then, I saw Garrett standing near the altar, his face draining of all color as he stared at the raw, swelling handprint blazing across my cheek. I did not look away. I held his terrified gaze and allowed a slow, razor-sharp smile to spread across my face, pulling at my split lip. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice echoing with crystal clarity through the surround sound system, remarkably steady and entirely devoid of fear. "I know you are all expecting a beautiful ceremony. However, I am officially announcing the immediate cancellation of this wedding." A collective, sharp gasp sucked the oxygen out of the room. I raised my free hand, gesturing gracefully toward the massive, 4,000-pixel resolution screen looming against the back wall of the stage. "Instead of vows," I continued, my tone dripping with icy, calculated polite restraint, "I invite you all to direct your attention to the main screen. We have prepared a much more authentic tribute gift for the Vance family to remember this day by. Please, enjoy the show." I reached into the concealed pocket of my silk gown and retrieved my cellular phone. My thumb hovered over the screen, resting perfectly over the single execution command I had staged just a quarter of an hour prior. I did not look at the frantic crowd anymore. I looked directly at the man standing by the altar, the man who arrogantly believed he owned my entire future. I pressed the button. The massive, 4K resolution light emitting diode display screen behind me did not simply turn on. It detonated into life with a blinding, cinematic flash of high-definition light. The state-of-the-art surround sound speakers, precisely calibrated by the estate to deliver the delicate, sweeping nuances of a live symphony orchestra, suddenly crackled. A microsecond later, they pumped out the raw, unfiltered audio of the bridal suite. The visual was absolutely inescapable. The massive screen towered 20 feet high, broadcasting the pristine, untouched security footage to the entire hall. There was Garrett, his tailored tuxedo jacket rumpled, his face contorted in a manic, ugly sneer. His voice, stripped of all its usual velvet charm, tore through the massive venue. "Take that silk trash off right now," the digital ghost of my fiancé snarled, his voice vibrating the heavy crystal chandeliers hanging from the vaulted ceiling. The climax of the footage arrived with brutal, unforgiving efficiency. The entire ballroom watched in horrified synchronization as the digital Garrett raised his hand. The subsequent strike sounded like a cannon blast. The sharp, explosive crack of his palm against my flesh was artificially amplified by the heavy bass subwoofers. It became a concussive shockwave that physically rattled the rib cages of the 300 guests seated before me. The screen showed my body collapsing violently out of frame, leaving only Garrett standing there, adjusting his lapels with reptilian coldness. Then came the threats. The venue's pristine acoustics picked up every single chilling syllable of his extortion. "I will tell them you stole highly sensitive proprietary data. I will use every favor I have to ensure you are blacklisted from every single tech firm in Silicon Valley before the reception dinner even begins." He was broadcasting his ruthless blackmail directly to the exact people he planned to manipulate. The reaction in the room was an instantaneous, catastrophic implosion of high society decorum. It was not just a social scandal. It was a massive financial apocalypse happening in real time. The front row, reserved for the absolute elite, became a ground zero of utter disgust. Marcus, the billionaire widower who held the absolute power of life and death over Garrett's entire enterprise, stood up so violently that his heavy oak chair tipped backward and crashed loudly onto the polished floor. The color had completely drained from Marcus's face, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated revulsion. The lavish memorial service he had funded to honor his late wife, Victoria, had been utterly desecrated by the very man claiming to protect her legacy. Behind Marcus, the venture capitalists and angel investors did not gasp or cover their mouths. They moved with the ruthless, cold efficiency of sharks detecting blood in the water. Within seconds, dozens of cellular phones illuminated the dim seating area. Fingers flew rapidly across glowing screens, frantically messaging public relations teams, legal departments, and crisis managers. The singular directive spreading through the room was immediate and total divestment. They were aggressively cutting their ties, pulling their millions of dollars in funding, and erasing Garrett Vance from their portfolios before the video even finished its first loop. To my right, a sudden commotion broke through the escalating noise. Garrett's mother, a woman who had spent the last year meticulously criticizing my every flaw and demanding total perfection, let out a high-pitched, strangled gasp. Her eyes rolled back into her head, and she collapsed entirely, fainting dead away onto the expensive floral carpet. Several bridesmaids screamed in panic, dropping their bouquets and rushing to fan her motionless body. Garrett himself was completely broken by the spectacle. The polished, charismatic groom was entirely gone. He sprinted toward the side of the stage, his eyes wide with a feral, unhinged panic. He lunged at the sound engineer's command station, physically shoving the terrified technician out of the way. "Turn it off!" he shrieked, his voice cracking hysterically over the amplified sound of his own violence. He began frantically slamming his fists against the mixing board, dragging his hands across the digital sliders, desperately trying to kill the main feed. But he was fighting a ghost. The entire audio-visual network was securely locked behind my complex, randomly generated quantum encryption protocol, no physical switch, no panicked button mashing, and no frantic screaming could override the master command I had established from the bridal suite. Garrett even dropped to his knees, desperately clawing at the thick power cables plugged into the wall, only to find them secured behind a bolted, industrial steel safety plate. The video kept playing, trapping him in a relentless, high-definition loop of his own monstrous behavior. The air in the room was suffocating, thick with panic, shattered egos, and the unmistakable, burning stench of a ruined empire. I had delivered exactly what I promised. I looked down at the heavy, wireless microphone still resting securely in my right hand. I extended my arm and simply let it go. It hit the wooden stage floor with a loud, abrasive thud, a final, definitive punctuation mark to my absolute victory. I turned my back on the giant screen and began to walk. As I descended the short flight of stairs and stepped onto the main ballroom floor, the chaotic, screaming crowd reacted to my presence with a deep, instinctive reverence. The 300 wealthy guests, the panicked investors, and the horrified relatives automatically parted. They scrambled backward in a desperate frenzy, knocking over chairs and shattering champagne glasses to create a wide, completely clear path for me. I walked right through the center of the madness, my head held high, my posture immaculate in my modern silk gown. I did not rush. I took my time, letting the cool silk glide around my ankles with every measured step. I moved steadily toward the grand entrance doors. Behind me, I could hear the desperate, ragged sound of Garrett crying out my name. "Stella, Stella, please," he wailed, his voice a pathetic, echoing plea bouncing off the marble walls, entirely drowned out by the amplified sound of his own recorded threats. The sound of his absolute destruction was beautiful. I did not pause. I did not turn around to look at the wreckage. I pushed open the heavy brass doors of the Crestwood estate and stepped out into the cool, crisp night air. A black luxury sedan, the private rideshare service I had booked exactly 20 minutes ago, was idling quietly at the base of the stone steps. The driver opened the rear door for me. I slipped into the quiet, leather-scented interior, fully prepared to leave the burning ashes of Garrett Vance behind me forever. The cinematic devastation inside the ballroom was undeniably satisfying, a spectacular theatrical display of justice that would be whispered about in elite social circles for decades. But the true, lethal strike of my retaliation did not occur under the crystal chandeliers of the estate. The public humiliation was merely a surface wound. The actual, fatal blow that completely dismantled Garrett Vance arrived exactly 72 hours later. By Monday morning, the corporate fallout was absolute and merciless. Marcus did not merely withdraw his venture capital. He initiated a scorched earth campaign across the entire technology sector. With a few highly discreet phone calls to his influential peers, the billionaire enacted a permanent, unyielding embargo against Garrett. Every single door in Silicon Valley was slammed shut and firmly bolted. Venture capitalists blocked his number. Angel investors canceled meetings. Public relations firms refused to even take his retainer. Garrett was completely financially radioactive. In a final, desperate act of survival, he attempted to liquidate his only remaining asset. He scrambled to sell the core predictive algorithm to a rival firm at a massive discount, hoping to secure enough capital to flee the state and start over. I know this because the automated security logs on my private server recorded his frantic, repeated attempts to access the primary code repository. I can only imagine the sheer, suffocating terror he must have felt sitting in his dark apartment, watching his computer screen load an entirely empty directory. Where millions of lines of revolutionary code should have been, there was only a stark, blinking system notification. Access denied. Intellectual property legally transferred to the Crawford Trust. The realization broke whatever fragile sanity he had left. On Tuesday evening, my cellular phone vibrated with a new voicemail. I sat on my living room sofa and listened to the sound of his total destruction. "Stella, please," his voice crackled through the speaker. It was a wet, ragged sound, completely stripped of the arrogant charisma he used to weaponize. "You took it. You took the code. I tried to log in, and it is all gone. I have nothing left. You did not just ruin my reputation. You stole my entire life's work. I am begging you, Stella. I am ruined. Tell me how to fix this." I deleted the audio file before he even finished sobbing. He still fundamentally misunderstood the situation. I did not steal his life's work. I simply took back mine. What Garrett never realized, and what made his downfall so profoundly tragic, was that I was never the submissive, obedient victim he assumed me to be. The conflict over Victoria's wedding gown was never just about asserting a personal boundary or preferring modern silk over vintage beads. It was the ultimate, final test. Months before the wedding, I had finalized the architecture of the predictive algorithm. I knew it was flawless. I knew it was worth tens of millions of dollars. And because I loved him, I had drafted legal documents to formally transfer the complete intellectual property rights to his name as a wedding gift on the morning after our ceremony. I was fully prepared to hand him the keys to a technological empire. All he had to do was prove that he valued my humanity more than a dead woman's memory. All he had to do was look at me in my simple silk dress, smile, and marry the woman standing in front of him. But he chose the ghost. He chose the violent illusion of control, and by demanding I wear that beaded cage, he unknowingly threw away the greatest fortune he would ever possess. Now, I sit comfortably in my brand-new, spacious corner office at the global headquarters of Ethra Innovations. I take a slow, warm sip of my black coffee, enjoying the quiet hum of the city far below. Resting perfectly centered on my massive mahogany desk is a freshly signed legal contract. I just finalized the sale of the core algorithm to a massive international conglomerate. The final purchase price was a staggering 8 figures. I turn my leather chair and look out at the sprawling skyline. The towering skyscraper glass acts as a perfect, clear mirror. I look at my reflection. The swelling on my left cheek has completely faded, leaving behind smooth, unmarked skin. There is no heavy, suffocating gown weighing down my shoulders. There is no arrogant man standing behind me, dictating my future. There is only a brilliant, incredibly wealthy woman looking back. I took a shattering betrayal, recompiled the broken code of my life, and built an entirely new empire of my own. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Zoe Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.